Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the second YouTube debate lecture. My name is Charlie, and today we're going to learn about arguments. So if you didn't see the first lecture video, this lecture is about AP debating. And an argument would basically be something, a reason that you support the motion or oppose the motion. So it's a very basic thing that you do. For example, in a motion of this House to ban smoking, an argument that the government team will give, that is the team that proposes the motion, would be that smoking is unhealthy. So it's basically a reason that you support or oppose the motion. Now, this is going to be something very basic in a debate. For example, in any type of debate format, you're going to see debaters giving arguments to explain why they're on that side. And it is also common in things such as essays where you have to write arguments or the oratory speeches where you give arguments to. But since this is AP debate, there are specific ways to give an argument. And even if you are a beginner, you need to learn how to give a good argument. So as we talked about, it's given by the PM, the LO, the DPM, or the DLO. PM and LO would give two important arguments, and DPM and DLO can give one or zero arguments based on their discretion. So there are two types of arguments mainly. There's the principle, and there's the practical. A principle argument is becoming less common by the day, but is still required or done in motions that are specifically about principle. For example, if the motion is this House believes something is moral, then there will likely be a principle argument. A principle argument, basically, to understand it easily, it's the justification. So why is something justified? And usually it involves something moral. So for example, why is something moral? And if it's not moral, then what is the reason that it should be, the motion should be passed or something should happen? There's a principle argument. This is often given by the first speaker. It's going to be rare to see a DPM or DLO giving a principle argument, even though it's not super banned. And you have the practical argument, which is just an argument. I would say it differs from the principal argument in the sense that it has, wait a second. Yeah. In the sense that it has an impact, like a harm and a benefit. So a harm or a benefit, I guess. All right, so that's basically what they are. First things first about arguments. I am going to give you a format because just to make things easier. But before I give you the format, when you're giving argument or even a rebuttal in an AP debate, the underlying thing that you need to do is first give the logic. The second, be detailed. So for example, if your argument is that smoking is bad because it is unhealthy, and it is unhealthy, therefore it is bad. Like, it can't just end here. For example, what is missing here in the motion this sounds ban smoking? First, why is it unhealthy? So what is the mechanism that makes smoking unhealthy for you? The second, it's also missing, like, okay, we get that it's unhealthy, but to what extent is it unhealthy? Does it give you cancer? Does it give you permanent damages? Does it give you severe damages? And to what extent is it unhealthy? And if we have that, then you said it's bad. Well, how bad is it? Okay, we get that it's unhealthy, but why does it translate to it being that bad for the individual, for the society, for the people that are not smoking? And okay, if we get that it is bad, then can you give me some examples, like about cancer, about the effects on humans, about such as examples like that? And okay, if we get that it is bad, then why should it be banned? Because the motion is not just if smoking is unhealthy. The motion is it should fit the threshold for something to be banned by the government. So your argument should be answering all these questions and not just ending like a one sentence here. So that's why we say detailed in any type of debate speech or any type of debate point that you're giving. You want it to have a lot of detail in it. So let's quickly just go over the structure. We can talk about the principle later because principle arguments, they're rare these days, and a practical argument are going to be the ones that you encounter the most. And even if you give a principle argument, you can maybe just give it to the inside of the practical argument format. So first, you have something called the premise. This is often the claim. This is often the assertion. This is basically easily understood. This is just the title of the argument. So what you want to prove. Let's use a different example. For example, this House ban social media. If you have an example like this, then your premise can be, for example, we would ban it because um, it it encourages comparison between the lives of children, making them depressed. It can be something like this. Notice that when you're giving a premise, it's also going to be the title of the argument. So it's going to be the first thing that you say. For example, if you're a prime minister, you would say, our first argument is that it encourages comparison between the lives of children, making them depressed. Now, what's important is that you don't make the premise one word. For example, if the premise is depression, that's a bit too vague for a debate because the goal of debate is not just to give a clear impression. It's supposed to be logical and have good content within your speech. So if you're saying depression, that's very unclear. And that's not like what an AP debater should do. So a premise should be one sentence explaining your argument. Something is this because of this would be a good enough premise and a good enough title of the argument that you would say at the top of the argument. Next, look at the mechanism. So why is that true? This is very important because I say why is that true, but that basically just means logic. And mechanism is a term that we use to say this. So why is it true that the comparison is being done? Now, you want to be specific here because it's very important to have strong mechanisms because your argument relies on your mechanism. Because for you to prove any impacts, impacts are the harms or benefits. If you want to prove any impacts, that means that it needs to be true. You need to prove that something is true. So, for example, here you would say social media has functions where people upload snips or lives. This often just upload highlights of life, but children thinks that their lives are much worse than that, comparing their lives to stuff they see on Insta stories. So this will be part of a mechanism. So social media, people upload snippets of their lives, and people are going to be comparing that to themselves. And then this is just an example, but if you want to make it a bit more specific, which you should in a real debate speech, you would also say something like, children, they're still immature and not enough experience. So actually think they need to be living better lives. They're more vulnerable, so much more depressed, and, subject to big harms. You can say something like this. And since it's a debate about banning it, you can also add more mechanisms to explain why you want to ban it. So why ban? Because parents can't control their children all the time. Because, for example, they need to go to work. And children often find ways to uh, go, ways to like ignore parental control features. And also because children themselves feel peer pressure to use social media. So government needs to ban it. So this would be like a relatively good enough mechanism. So we explained why they compare, why this makes them depressed, and why they would ban it. Now, in the mechanism, it's also good to include, this is the next step, or I guess a sub-step, an example. So what I mean by example is, if you're not an AP debater, you would often think that you need to read a lot of news to give examples. For example, you think, oh, I want to give an example, so maybe I need to give an example of children committing suicide or like a like evidence or actual cases of children committing suicide. Well, that is good, and if you know that, you definitely should give that, but that's not the only type of example. So an example in the bigger sense or in the AP sense can also mean just characterizing. More specifically, it doesn't need to be like the very, very single specific case inside of the argument. It can be something just as simple as explaining a bit more about what it actually looks like in the real world. So I think this is explanation that I often use, putting the abstract into the real. So, for example, this is kind of abstract. I mean, we're just saying that they unload highlights of their life. We're just saying that they're immature, and we're just saying that parents are working, which is kind of just words around just a fluff. Just put that down into real life. So, okay, unload highlights of life. What does this look like? Like this looks like going to trips, to large cities, just like dating, photos of dating your pretty boyfriend, going to expensive restaurants, and then children think that their lives are much worse because they compare that to their lives of going to school all day and studying all day. Okay. So now we make it more specific. Oh, so it's about you seeing everyone making such good experiences in like big restaurants or trips that they go to and shooting compared to their mundane lives. And let's make it a bit clearer here. Children, they're not enough experience. Okay, that also means that haven't talked to as many people as adults would have. Yeah. Because adults have understanding that not everyone lives in their highlight moments 24/7. But since children lack experience and I guess like critical thinking skills, um, think that those highlights happen all the time. Yeah. For example, you can also say stuck in school for most of life, so didn't have enough experience. You can also give like just scientific stuff. They're emotionally, mentally not developed enough because we're talking about kids that are younger than me. They're like 14, 15. They're mentally not developed and more emotional shock, which connects with the vulnerability thing that I wrote here. So you can put that there too. So this is the type of stuff that they go through. And you can also connect this to like there are people that fear about future going to college. So you get the point. We're being quite specific and detailed. So why are they banning it? Parents can't control children on the time they need to go to work. This is already specific enough. But for example, we can say that some parents, some kids, both parents work two jobs, work jobs. For some parents, work like 10 hours a day. Kind of control features, it can be more specific here. Children are digitally smart these days, but parents are not. And for example, I guess I never went through this personally, but maybe you reset your phone or you use the iPad that's in your friend's iPad or like a public iPad to access Instagram. So you can't really block them just like totally. But a governmental ban would mean making account itself uh, inaccessible, impossible. By the way, this stuff should be in your introduction, in your modeling or characterization. But in this case, it would just be mentioning what was already said in the model back to the argument. Hey, judge, like we told you, inside of our model, we're going to make And for example, Australia has made making accounts itself impossible. So it's a very it's a solution that it is able to like solve it really well. Effective solution. All right. And peer pressure can be a bit more specific here too. Um, friend, like most friends already have Insta after going on trip. They unload stories. They can't mention you. They can't tag you. You feel left out. Can't DM with them on Insta. There are like clear peer pressure. Because, for example, by being detailed, look how much more persuasive I am. Like, if I just say, oh, hey, Judge, children feel peer pressure to use social media. Okay, moving on. Government needs to ban it because government has strong power. Then all my next speaker needs to do to rebut to that would be, no, children do not feel peer pressure because school teaches them not to feel peer pressure, and students are rational enough. If they say that, that's already like a legitimate rebuttal because my point was so shallow. Now make it deeper. Hey, children feel peer pressure not only because they're emotionally underdeveloped, but also because if you look at it, then it becomes much more persuasive. For example, my most friends already have an Instagram, and after we go on a trip, after we go on a competition, after we go on a restaurant, they upload stories. But like when they're uploading stories, they ask for my Instagram handle, but I don't have an Instagram handle, so they can't tag me on Instagram stories. So that really feels awkward. I feel left out. I feel like I'm a freak that doesn't use today's technology, and I feel just left out inside the friend group. And for example, many children will have my friends will connect with other people on Instagram, and they talk to new people and talk to people that they don't know that well, but inside of their social circles, and they communicate with them and socialize with them in a way that I am not able to do that. I have the fear of missing out because I cannot communicate with them as much as my friends do. I cannot DM them with Insta, so I feel like they are DMing way more inside of their DM groups, and I'm being left out of that because I only have WhatsApp and nobody uses WhatsApp. Like for example, now that these things are much more specific, it becomes much more persuasive. Now, if my rebuttal speaker just says, no, but children have the rationality to control themselves because they learn that in school and they learn that in parents, that rebuttal is not going to be that much effective because I've been so much more persuasive here, so much more specific here. So that's when that's why an AP needs to be a lot more detailed. You need to be a lot more logically strong. All right. So that's basically how a mechanism should be. If I'm actually debating, I would spend more time writing this and add even more stuff. But this is just to give you an idea. Next thing is I said example is a substep. There's another substep actually. There's also something called feasibility, which is also called likelihood. It's how likely this is to happen. But the thing is, if you're being detailed enough and you're consciously being detailed enough while writing mechanisms, this is likely already going to be there. So let's talk about likelihood. Like, for example, why is it likely that they upload highlights of your life? Like, obviously, that's likely because why would you upload you getting a 53 out of 100 on your test in a platform that everyone's going to watch it? Because you want to upload highlights because you want other people to see how good your life is. That's kind of likely enough. Maybe you don't even need to say that. So why is it likely? You can add it here maybe because this scientifically the average is that students are average. They're like mediocre. We can't have everyone that are living the best lives all the time. So statistically, these are going to be the most common people, the people that have mundane lives. And this is self-explanatory, so you don't need to include likelihood that much, but it's self-explanatory that they're in high school most of their lives since they are students, that they don't have that they don't have enough experience. And they're likely to be emotionally, mentally not developed because they are children. And they're likely to be the parents can't control their children all the time. So just double check if you have proven likelihood. Because, for example, this is an easy motion, so the arguments are going to be pretty intuitive. Like it is intuitive that children are immature. It is intuitive that social media is pretty bad for you. So that's why likelihood seems to be more of a given, but in the more difficult motion, there are cases where you've written a full mechanism, but you didn't explain why that's likely. So if you haven't, just add a bit more, you'll be able to do it. So this is really the key of the argument. If you don't have strong mechanism, you don't have anything. Like you can have strong impacts, but I haven't really seen anyone have high impacts, but like a bad mechanism, like that's not really real. And without a mechanism, the argument really is something. Next, you have the impact. It's explaining the harm or benefits. You might be thinking, hey, didn't you explain all your harms and benefits here anyway? And that's true. So that is true. So even if you kind of forget to do this, and this is all that you said, your judge might not even say anything. Your judge might think that's just fine. The only reason that we're doing this is because we want to be sure that we created an impact. We want to make sure and double check that our impact has been given. So I talked about depression here already, but I would either make it longer in the impact section or just re-mention it. Let's talk about the impact part. Depression, due to comparison, lives feel much worse. You can end it here, but you would rather make it a bit more longer. Because so what does the depression look like? It looks like from high comparison, you'll likely be doing better. And humans and if they feel like they're missing out, this leads to long-term consequences, depression, and loss of self-confidence. Leads to that being continued at adulthood because childhood trauma makes them vulnerable as a person, makes them damaged as a person, even in future. You get what I mean. You can stop at one sentence, but make it longer and the impact becomes bigger. Yeah, that'd be fine enough. And then we have the importance. But then again, importance is really just a sub-step inside of the impact. Because if you are going to do it very, very like mechanically, then I guess you can stop impact here and then just be the importance. But if you're being detailed enough inside of the impact, importance is kind of a given. So just make sure that you made your impact sound important. Make sure you just made the impact big enough for the judge to care about. And this already itself is a developed argument. But in the higher level of debate, you're going to see PMs weighing this argument against other arguments. This basically is a rebuttal if you don't know what weighing is. But it wouldn't be a rebuttal exactly because you're comparing your argument with their argument. For example, their argument would be talking about happiness of children. We can weigh that by saying, first of all, you can kind of just rebut to the argument. Like, that's fine. Like, it gets a bit wishy-washy here in that, oh, you're a PM, you need to give arguments, but I feel like I'm doing a bunch of rebuttals here in the weighing section. The thing is, your primary job is to give your positive material, i.e. the arguments, but if you have time left, then you can give rebuttals to points that they will say anyway. If you're giving a bunch of rebuttals to the point that you can't do this properly, then you're doing a bad job. But if you already did this pretty well, you have like a minute or two or three left, then you can just do more rebuttals. Because the thing is, arguments and rebuttals aren't that different. For example, my mic was off for a second. If you have an argument and then you add points to respond to rebuttals that may come in the future, that makes your argument itself stronger. We call that being like bulletproof. So adding rebuttals or responding to possible rebuttals that they say from the beginning, from the get-go, is actually better. It's all right. they're going to talk about the happiness of children. So we're going to say it's not really true. Why? Because, for example, we would say, um, it's only short-term dopamine from loading highlights of life. But you have a long-term, bigger sense of doom and regret when comparing lives. You feel unvalued. So you can say that the happiness part isn't really true. And then compare that. Some bursts of dopamine from gaming with friends to feeling unvalued as a person, to feel like you're trailing compared to others. And now it feels you characterized their benefits as very short term. You characterized our benefits as being unvalued as a person, like you're being rejected as a good enough human with a lots of value. So now you made your impacts look bigger. So this would be enough of arguments. You might be thinking, hey, I still have more time left, and I want to see a bit more. Then, like I said, like I talked about, you can make your argument more bulletproof. So you're a PM, you still have 15 minutes of prep time, your argument is done, and you imagine yourself as the LO. How would I rebut my own argument? Hmm. You might think that the LO can rebut my argument by saying that children um, already know how to use social media, and they already know that they shouldn't compare their lives to other kids that much. Well, you already kind of made it bulletproof by saying that they're very immature and not experienced enough. Another rebuttal that they might make is that they might say, shouldn't compare lives anyway. And like offline in-person situations where your friends wear Gucci stuff. Then you can make the rebuttal here saying that Instagram makes it way bigger because you have like 50 friends stacked in stories about how good their life is. That's uncomparable to seeing one or two friends every day in person wearing red hats. You see where I'm going with this. So make your arguments bulletproof by adding these free bubbles. Okay. And then this really is long. If you want to make it longer, you can just add more stuff where you want to do. You can add more examples, you can add more mechanisms, you can add more impacts other than depression 2. You can add more pre-rebuttals. That's also fine. So if you're the PM that goes, I can't fill in my 4 minutes, I can't fill in my 8 minutes, then maybe you're not being detailed enough. And if there's one thing that I want you to take from this lecture is make sure you're explaining the whole part without cutting anything. And the other thing that I want you to tell you is make sure you're not giving zero rebuttals in an argument. You should be giving some at least. If you have no rebuttal material inside of an argument, that would be like a speech. That would be maybe a public forum. That would not really be an AP debate. You need some pre-rebuttals inside of your arguments. So thank you today for listening to me talk about arguments. This is how I'll personally give it. And I think this is a very good way to give arguments. Thank you.